William couldn't resist a wager. He had once even lost his wife to a man in a game of chance. But now, if he lost this latest gamble, he would swing from the gallows. "1777, and the day was warm. The sun shone in a brilliant bright blue cloudless sky. The summer fair had arrived at the links in Aberdeen, Scotland. Edward walked along enjoying such a fair day. He saw parents picnicking while their children ran around them playing with their hoops, and young lovers strolling arm in arm. Young lads raced from stall to stall, spending their pocket money without care. Edward smiled and shook his head, knowing they'd regret their losses soon enough. As he walked, he noted one stall was drawing quite a crowd. He made his way over to the crowd to see what all the excitement was about. Webster's Wheel of Fortune. He saw the sign over the heads of the crowd, but as he made his way to the front, a woman caught his eye. He stopped immediately. Her long flowing jet black hair waved in the breeze. She was beautiful, around 30 years old, buxom and brazen, and dressed head to toe like a gypsy. She marched up and down, addressing the crowd. She was so totally outrageous with her humour, the masses were hooked. As she walked among the gentlemen at the front of the crowd, linking one man's arm and then moving on, trying another man's hat on and giving it back to him and moving on again. As she went, she called out,
"Today you came here with hardly a penny in your pockets. Tonight you could go home as rich as Croesus,"
who was an ancient king of Lydia. She spun the arrow on the wheel.
"See how easy it is for the arrow on the wheel of fortune to swing round to your number, and for the big prize to be yours."
Like the natural actress she clearly was, she paused for the effect, feeding off the crowd, then pulled something out from a satchel.
"And the big prize, ladies and gentlemen?"
She held aloft a cloth bag bulging at the seams.
"This bag full of gold coins. The end of all your troubles is right here, just waiting for you to claim it."
The crowd cheered. Edward watched young man after young man go up to the gypsy lady and try his luck, only to come away with a consolation prize, a bag of sweets or a straw doll. But each time, the gentleman with the lady would shake his head and say,
"Agnes, we will be going home with big losses tonight."
Once or twice the crowd held their breath, as it looked like the arrow would land on the gold coins. The arrow would pause, hovering slightly, tantalisingly close, and then move on. Edward turned to leave. Suddenly, the arrow hovered, wavered, and stood still, straight on top of the bag of gold. The wheel's bias had slipped out of alignment and stopped the arrow just where it should not have stopped. But as the spellbound crowd thought that someone was up for the jackpot, but they had reckoned without Agnes. As quick as a flash, she nudged the arrow, moving it onto the next slot, which of course was an empty one. The crowd was astonished at this rapid manoeuvre, and quickly turned to anger, and then to booing. The young man who had his money on the wheel stepped forward, pointed an accusing finger at Agnes and shouted, "You cheated! I'm off to fetch a constable." Agnes knew how to turn a bad moment to her advantage.
"You were unlucky, that's all,"
she simpered.
"But a good-looking lad like you deserves a prize, so I'll give you a kiss."
As she advanced upon him smiling, her arms outstretched, he backed off, all courage melting away. The crowd's anger now turned to amusement.
"Come on, laddie. You have no need to be shy with me. I only want to kiss you, not eat you. It could be lucky. Quite a few lads have enjoyed kissing me, and you might even like it yourself."
"Kiss her! Kiss her!" the crowd chanted, warming to a bit of harmless excitement. As Agnes advanced on the young man, they formed a solid wall behind him, blocking his only means of escape. To their great delight, Agnes caught up with him. Her massive embrace carried him struggling to the wheel and pinned him underneath the tantalising bag of gold. And she kissed him passionately several times. When Agnes had finished, Webster stepped forward with his basket of prizes in arms. As he handed them over to the blushing young man, the crowd roared with their delight, and had completely forgotten the unfortunate fellow had just been cheated out of his bag of gold coins. The crowd disbanded, and Edward went on his way. The next day, Edward walked the same route and passed Webster's Wheel of Fortune, and while he was there, he saw the same thing happen again. But this time, a constable was on hand. Agnes was released without charge, but Webster was arrested, to the booing and jeers of the crowd, and he was banned from Aberdeen for life. After this, Webster became obsessed with gambling, and it took over his life, and he needed to find a way to feed his addiction. In desperation, Webster now turned to robbery, and in the summer of 1787, he was caught breaking into a house and held until constables arrived. He was then arrested on 2 charges, one of theft and one of housebreaking. Webster pled guilty to theft, which if convicted was only a prison sentence, and he pleaded not guilty to housebreaking, which was a hangable offence. In court, everything seemed to be going William Webster's way, until one of the articles that had been stolen from the house was raised as evidence. This was a white linen dress belonging to a 14-year-old girl. The courtroom hushed to a silence when the 14-year-old girl took to the stand. The prosecutor gave a wry smile to Webster, then turned to the girl and pressed her to give evidence against Webster, asking if the dress stolen was indeed hers. The girl hesitated. She didn't want to say anything. She looked down at her feet, wishing that she was anywhere else. She knew that if she said that was her dress, the man in the dock would be sentenced to death. She didn't want that on her conscience. She couldn't be sure. Her white dress was like thousands of others. She bit her lip, and slowly she shook her head. She just couldn't commit herself. The prosecution pressed the girl again, clenching his hand into a fist in frustration, as again she said no. The man in the dock, Mr. William Webster, now stood a chance of acquittal, because the dress was the only direct evidence linking him to the crime. But Webster, being the gambler he was, completely overplayed his hand. In his mind, he reasoned that the dress would no longer fit the witness because the housebreaking had taken place a year previously, and she must have grown considerably by now. So, he wanted to make it seem like he wanted to help the cause of justice. He rose to his feet, smiling at the prosecutor as he did so, and addressed the judge, Lord Braxfield.
My lord, could not the witness help solve the question by slipping on the dress here in court?
Excellent idea. Would you mind, girl? Said the judge. Webster rubbed his hands together in excited confidence. He knew that if the girl couldn't put on the dress, acquittal would become a certainty, rather than a probability. But a wise man would have stayed silent, for the case was going his way, and this particular charge of housebreaking was on the brink of being dismissed. But Webster just couldn't leave it alone. A curious silence descended on the court as the girl picked up the dress. She slid in her left arm, and she was just about to slip it over her head when she paused, silent like a statue. Then she pointed to a mark on the seam, leaning forwards towards the judge. She said, "I don't need to put it on. I recognise this mark. This is my blood. I pricked my finger with a needle while stitching the hem." William Webster looked at her in astonishment, while the colour drained from his face. He had made the last throw of the dice, gambling with his life, and lost. Without further ado, he was sentenced to death, and in shock and pale was led to the condemned cell. But again, he wasn't quite done as he tried soaring through the bars. But he was caught and put into a safer cell. On Friday, the 1st of June 1787, he mounted the steps to the scaffold, and scanning the crowd of onlookers, William Webster picked out Agnes Brown, in which she called out to Webster.
Save a place for me down by the fireplace.
But Webster's reply was lost over the noise of the crowd. And then she vanished among the mob, too busy picking the pockets of bystanders, having discovered that a hanging audience is usually too busy watching the condemned man's last agony to worry about nimble fingers sliding into their pockets. But as she did her work, a heavy hand of a constable descended on her shoulder. "Madame, you're under arrest," the constable said. Agnes was sentenced to be whipped through the streets on Friday, October the 12th, and then transported to Australia for 7 years. Neither punishment seemed to worry her in the least. She still carried on making jokes, and on the day of the whipping, she entertained the crowd with bawdy jokes, turning to the man who was charged with whipping her, and taunted him, saying,
Why don't you take off my dress, so those good people can see what a real woman looks like?
When the embarrassed fellow started stepping away, Agnes began undoing her buttons, until court officials ran to her quickly, stopping her in the act. It could have been another typical Agnes Brown piece of bluffing, as she was reported to have been wearing a buckskin jacket under her dress, which, if discovered, would have made her sentence even worse. She was transported to New South Wales, Australia, but there was no record of what happened to her after she arrived. But I'm pretty sure a character like the Black Widow didn't just go quietly. Well, that'll about do it. But it's important to remember that when everyone was relatively poor, the Wheel of Fortune was a big draw, as it offered the chance to win big. So it was a magnet to the desperate and dreamers alike, so crime was rife at large gatherings. Agnes Brown was known as the Black Widow on the account of the surprising number of men in her life that had ended up at the gallows. She was known throughout the length and breadth of Scotland as the ideal thieves' partner, as she worked with Aberdeen's two most celebrated robbers, John Gunn and Peter Young, as well as other well-known scoundrels and villains. She was also a nimble pickpocket in her own right. William Webster invited Agnes onto his scam, which was the Wheel of Fortune. They would travel around the summer fairs with it, William being the barker and Agnes being the spinner. That puts a bag of money to be won and spins the wheel. Agnes was there to keep the crowd in good humour, making them think they were going to win a fortune. They never would, of course, because the wheel will never stop at the point where the money is, because the wheel was fixed and weighted, so it'd never land on the money. Well, that'll do it. But I hope you enjoyed this story. It's a little bit different, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and what you think happened to the Black Widow in Australia. If you know of this story, or you know what happened to Agnes, please let me know, as I think there'd be another interesting story there. Thank you for your support. Take care.